Can you even imagine? My own father, standing at the head of a table, surrounded by 50 family members, raising his glass, and then announcing to everyone that they were all there to erase me? It was my 30th birthday, for crying out loud. My birthday. Welcome back, where the people everyone underestimates finally set the record straight, out loud, in the room where it happened. If your family ever made you the quiet one who carries everything and gets thanked for nothing, stay with me. Drop a comment, and be sure to subscribe. My name is Paige Mercer, and I should have known something was wrong from that very first phone call. It was my mother, 2 weeks before my 30th. Her voice had that careful, rehearsed quality, like she was reading off a card. "We want to do a special family dinner," she said. "For your 30th. Everyone's coming." I asked what the occasion was, beyond the obvious. She said family was occasion enough, and then she dropped a line that stuck in my ear like a splinter. "Real family doesn't keep score, honey." I mean, can you believe it? I hadn't been keeping score. I'd been keeping the lights on. But that's a different thing entirely, and I'd never once said it out loud. My mother and I hadn't had a real conversation in months. Just logistics, a bill here, a favor there. So, a sudden dinner, everyone invited, a banquet room booked at the Italian place on Route 9. It felt less like a celebration and more like a summons. I asked who everyone was. She listed cousins I hadn't seen since a funeral, aunts, my Uncle Dale, my brother Trevor, of course, always Trevor. I told her I'd be there, because that's what I always said. Then I just sat in my truck in the parking lot of a job site, staring at the steering wheel for a long time. 30 years old, a business I built with my own hands, and my stomach was in a knot over a birthday dinner, like I was 9 again, waiting to find out which version of my family was going to show up. Now, I need to tell you who I am, because this story just doesn't make sense if you think I'm just a family doormat. I own a heating and cooling company, Mercer Mechanical. 2 trucks now, 6 employees, my name on the side in bright blue letters. I started it at 23, out of the back of one rusted-out van I bought for $800 and a handshake. I learned the trade because somebody had to be useful, and useful was the only kind of love that ever seemed to count in my house. While my brother got chances, I got responsibilities. I'm not bitter about that, or I try not to be. The work, it saved me. When you can fix a furnace at 2 a.m. while a family shivers around you, you stop needing anyone to tell you that you matter. You can feel it in your own 2 hands. By 30, I had a savings account, a credit rating, a paid-off truck, and a quiet reputation as the Mercer who answered her phone. That last part, that's important, because in my family, the person who answers the phone is usually the person who pays. There was a year, about 5 years back, when everything fell apart for my parents. I'll get to it, because it's the whole spine of the story. For now, just know this. I was the one who answered the phone that year, too. I always answered, and I never told a single soul in that family what it cost me. Which, as it turns out, is exactly how my father was able to stand up at that dinner and pretend I'd never given them anything at all. The dinner makes no sense until you know about Trevor. My brother is 3 years younger, and he was born already forgiven. Whatever he broke, someone else swept up. He totaled a car at 19, and my parents bought him another. He dropped out of 2 programs, and they called it finding himself. He started a business selling supplements online, then a vending route, then something with crypto I never fully understood. And each one ended with a phone call to me, not to them. They don't have it. My mother would say, "Trevor's in a tight spot," and the number would follow. And I would move money I'd earned crawling through attics in July into an account that emptied like a bathtub with no plug. I did it 3 times. The 3rd time, I said it was the last time, and I meant it. That was about 4 months before the dinner. Trevor had a new idea, a big one, and he needed $20,000 to get in early. I said no. Not cruel, just no. I said I loved him, and I was done being his bank. My mother called me selfish. My father didn't call at all. And I told myself that was the end of it. Just a no, just a boundary. I didn't understand yet that in my family, a no from me wasn't an answer. It was a problem to be solved. And they'd booked a banquet room to solve it. The week before the dinner, the signs were everywhere, if I'd let myself read them. My mother called twice to confirm I was coming, which she never did. Each time, her voice got tighter. The 2nd time, I asked her point blank, "Mom, is something going on? This feels strange." There was a pause long enough to drive a truck through. "Can a family just want to celebrate you?" she finally said, and her voice cracked on the word celebrate. I told myself I was being paranoid. Then Trevor texted me, which he only did when he wanted something. "See you Saturday, sis." Smiley face. A smiley face. Trevor hadn't sent me a smiley face since we were teenagers. I stared at it. Something in me, the part that's good at diagnosing a system that's about to fail, screamed, "Don't go. Find a reason." But then my mother called a third time. And this time, she didn't bother with celebration. "Please, Paige," she said, quiet, almost a whisper. "Just come. One dinner for me." And there it is. The soft place every over-responsible daughter has. The one that overrides every alarm. My mother asked me for one thing, plainly, and I couldn't make myself say no to her face. I told her I'd be there at 7. I even bought a gift, a scarf she'd admired once. I wore the nice dress. I did my hair. I drove to that restaurant like a woman walking into her own surprise party, which, in the worst possible way, is exactly what it was. The banquet room at the Italian place on Route 9 was decked out like someone really meant it. Balloons in a 3 and a 0 floated over a long table set for 50. There was a banner. There was a cake on a side table with white frosting and my name piped in blue, the same blue as the letters on my trucks. And I remember thinking, my mother must have asked for that color. She must have thought of me. And my throat went tight. Cousins I hadn't seen in years stood up when I walked in. Aunt Ruth pressed a card into my hand. My Uncle Dale clapped me on the shoulder. For about 90 seconds, I felt like the guest of honor. I felt, God help me, loved. I scanned the room for my parents and found my mother near the front, not coming toward me, holding her own elbows. My father stood beside her in his good jacket, the one he wore to weddings and funerals, and he was watching me with an expression I couldn't place. Not warmth, something flatter. Trevor lounged at the head of the table, near the little podium the restaurant kept for toasts, and he lifted his drink at me with that smirk. I waved back. I set the scarf, wrapped in birthday paper, on the gift table next to the cake with my name on it. I had no idea I was decorating my own ambush. I just thought my family had finally, after 30 years, decided to make a fuss over me. It is a particular kind of cruel to dress a trap up as the thing a person has wanted their whole life. It took me longer than it should have to feel the room tilt. Nobody sang. That was the first thing. You get 50 people around a birthday cake. Somebody starts the song before the candles are even lit. But the cake sat there unlit, and the talking stayed low and strange, the way a waiting room sounds. People kept glancing at me, and then away fast, like I was a car wreck they didn't want to be caught staring at. Aunt Ruth wouldn't quite meet my eyes after she gave me the card. A cousin asked how the business was going, and then didn't listen to the answer. I found a seat halfway down the table, and my mother sat far from me, near my father, and didn't look over. I told myself, big family, lots of noise. Everybody's awkward. But the part of me that reads systems was lighting up now, every gauge in the red. Then my Uncle Dale stood, picked up a fork, and tapped it against his water glass. The room went quiet fast. Too fast. Like they'd been waiting for the signal. My father rose to his feet at the head of the table and picked up his glass. He looked down the length of it, past all those faces, and landed on me. And I had the sudden, sinking certainty that I had walked into something, and that whatever this dinner was, it had never once been about my birthday. I should have read the room the second nobody sang. My father cleared his throat and thanked everyone for coming. He said it meant a lot that the whole family could be together. His voice had the smooth, public cadence he used at job sites back when he had job sites. The boss voice, the one that expected the room to listen. He talked about family for a minute, about loyalty, about how a family is only as strong as its weakest link. And I felt the first cold drop of understanding slide down my spine. Then he raised his glass higher, looked straight at me and said it. "We're all here tonight," he said, "to cut you out of this family." For a second, I genuinely thought I'd misheard. I waited for the punchline, the laugh, the just kidding, sweetheart. It didn't come. He held my eyes, and he held his glass, and the room held its breath. 50 relatives, every one of them suddenly fascinated by their napkins, by the ceiling, by anything but the daughter at the table with her name on the cake. My mother stared at the tablecloth. Trevor sipped his drink, and I sat there in my nice dress, 30 years old, with a wrapped scarf on the gift table, and I understood that they had gathered the entire family, booked a room, ordered a cake, and lit no candles, all to humiliate me into disappearing. Every eye in that room turned to me, waiting to see if I'd cry, if I'd run, if I'd beg. I did the one thing none of them had planned for. I got very, very calm. I sat there while my own father listed my crimes to a room full of people who'd eaten at my table. If you've ever been put on trial by the family you kept afloat, you already know how quiet a room can get and how loud your own heartbeat sounds in it. Stay with me, because the verdict didn't go the way they rehearsed. My father went on. He told the room I'd grown cold, that success had gone to my head, that I'd turned my back on my own brother in his time of need, that I thought my money made me better than them. He said it sadly, like a man forced into a hard duty, and I watched the heads nod. Aunt Carol murmured something about how a shame it was. A cousin sighed. They believed him, because why wouldn't they? They didn't know what I'd done, only what I hadn't done lately, which was hand Trevor $20,000. My mother finally spoke, her voice trembling, perfectly pitched for the audience. "We've given you everything, Paige," she said, "and you've never once put this family first." I almost laughed. It came up my throat like a bubble and I swallowed it. Everything. They'd given me everything. I looked around that beautiful room at the balloons and the banner and the cake in my favorite blue. And I started very quietly to do the math out loud in my own head. The math they were betting their whole performance on me never saying. To tell you what I was thinking at that table, I have to take you back 5 years. To the year my father lost everything. He'd run a construction outfit for 2 decades, Mercer Builders, and he was good at the building, bad at the books. When the housing market turned, he'd overextended on a development that stalled, and it took him down fast. Suppliers went unpaid. A lawsuit. Then the bank came for the house we grew up in. The white 2-story on Linden Street with the porch my father built himself the summer I was 8. I remember the day the notice went up. My mother called me crying. The real kind of crying, not the performance she'd give later. The bank had set a date, a sheriff's sale. The house would go to auction on the courthouse steps to the highest bidder, and there was nothing they could do, no money to stop it. My father, too proud and too broke to even tell the extended family it was happening. He told everyone they were thinking about downsizing. That was the lie he could live with. Behind it, the most stable home any of us had ever known was about to be sold to a stranger, and my parents were going to be renters in their 60s with nothing. My father couldn't fix it. My mother couldn't fix it. So they did what the Mercers always did when something couldn't be fixed. They didn't call Trevor. They called me. I was 25. The business was 2 years old and barely standing. But I'd been raised to answer the phone, so I answered it. I couldn't give my parents the money to cure the loan. The bank was past that. They wanted the whole thing or the house. So I did the only thing I could think of. I went to the auction myself. I spent 3 weeks first in a credit union office, putting my new trucks up as collateral, draining the savings I'd bled for, scraping together every dollar and every dollar of credit I could reach. I read everything I could find about how a sheriff's sale works, because I'd never set foot at one. And on a cold morning in March, I stood on the courthouse steps with a handful of investors and a folder of cashier's checks. And when they called the property at 14 Linden Street, I raised my hand. My voice didn't shake. I'd practiced it in the truck. I outbid a man in a gray coat who flipped houses. And when the gavel came down, the house my father built the porch on belonged to me. Not the bank. Not a stranger. Me. I paid it off over the next 5 years. Every month, on top of payroll and parts and fuel. I never missed. And I never, ever told the family how I'd done it because I knew my father, and I knew that the truth would humiliate him more than losing the house ever could. So I made a different plan. A quieter one. Here's the part I've never told anyone until now. After the gavel came down, I drove to my parents' house with the deed in my glove box and a story already built. I told them the bank had found a hardship program at the last minute, a restructuring that, as long as they kept up with a modest monthly payment to a management company, they could stay in the house indefinitely. The management company was me. The modest payment went into the account I used to pay the mortgage I now held. My father's face when I told him that's a thing I'll carry forever. The relief in it. He thought he was going to be the Mercer who lost the family home. And instead, he got to keep his porch and his pride in one swoop. He didn't ask many questions. People don't when you hand them back the thing they thought they'd lost. He shook my hand, businesslike, because we didn't hug in my family. And then a week later, he did something he had never done before or since. He wrote me a note, just a folded piece of paper left on the seat of my truck. His blocky, contractor's handwriting. "I'll never forget what you did, kiddo." I kept that note. I kept it in the same envelope as the deed for 5 years. The proof of the house and the promise about it, folded together. I want you to remember that note because my father had forgotten exactly one thing by the night of that dinner, and it was that. Back at the table, my father was still talking, but I was barely hearing the words now. I was hearing the shape of them. He was building a case brick by brick, the way he used to build houses. And the foundation of it was that I had given this family nothing while taking the moral high ground. My mother dabbed her eyes. "She thinks she's above us," she told a cousin, not quietly. "Always did." Trevor leaned back in his chair with the easy posture of a man whose problems were being solved for him. And I realized sitting there that this wasn't really about my birthday, or my coldness, or even Trevor's $20,000. This was about clearing the board. If they could brand me the bad daughter in front of the whole family, the one who'd abandoned them, then nobody would blink when whatever my parents had left went to Trevor instead. The disinheritance was the point. The dinner was just the ceremony. My hand drifted to the bag in my lap, the one I'd almost not brought. Inside it was a flat envelope I'd packed the night before, after Trevor's smiley face and my mother's third phone call had finally tripped the alarm I'd been ignoring all week. I hadn't been sure I'd need it. I told myself I was being dramatic, but I'm a woman who carries the right tool for the job always. And some part of me had known exactly what job this was going to turn out to be. Under the table, where no one could see, I opened the bag and looked at the envelope. I knew what was in it because I'd put it there, but I needed to see it anyway. The way you check the safety on a thing you hope you won't have to use. Inside were 3 pieces of paper. The first was a copy of the deed to 14 Linden Street, the house my parents were sitting in 50 miles away while they ate cake at my expulsion, with one name on the ownership line, mine. Paige Mercer. The second was the receipt from the sheriff's sale, dated 5 years ago that March, stamped and official, the public record of the morning I bought back my family's home with my own credit and my own nerve. And the third was the note, the folded piece of paper, soft now from being handled, my father's blocky handwriting going faint at the creases. "I'll never forget what you did, kiddo." I read those words under the table while 20 feet away, the man who wrote them told 50 people I had never done anything for this family at all. I want to be honest about what I felt, because it wasn't triumph. Not yet. It was grief, because part of me had driven to that restaurant still hoping, still 9 years old, and waiting to be chosen. And the envelope in my lap was the end of that hope. They were never going to choose me. They were going to perform my exile and call it justice. I closed the bag. I sat with the deed against my knee like a hand on a shoulder. And somewhere in those few seconds, the grief cooled into something steadier. I was done being the daughter who paid in secret to protect a man's pride. If he wanted a public reckoning in front of the whole family, then all right. He'd picked the room. He'd picked the witnesses. He just hadn't picked the story. I had the story. It was sitting in my lap with his handwriting on it. It was Trevor who tipped their hand all the way over. He sat down his drink and decided to be helpful, the way he was always helpful right when it cost him nothing and someone else everything. "Look, Paige," he said in the reasonable voice he saved for taking things. "Nobody wants a scene. We just think it would be cleaner if you stepped back from family stuff, the holidays, the decisions, Mom and Dad's. You know their arrangements." He waved a hand. "Sign off. Let the rest of us handle things and we can all move on. Their arrangements. Sign off." There it was, in my brother's lazy drawl. The whole machine laid bare. They didn't just want me shamed. They wanted me to legally and publicly step away from anything my parents owned, so that when the time came, it would all flow to Trevor without a fight. He thought he was offering me a dignified exit. He had no idea he was asking me to sign away a house I already owned. I looked at my brother for a long moment. He'd never once asked how our parents kept the house after Dad went under. He'd never wondered. It had simply continued to exist for him, like everything else, paid for by a sister he considered beneath him. "Step back from the arrangements," I repeated slowly, tasting it. "Sign off." Trevor nodded, encouraged, thinking I was coming around. Across the table, My father watched me with the weary stillness of a man who senses the ground shifting but can't say why. Some animal part of him knew. He'd written that note, after all. Somewhere in him, he remembered. I had two choices, and I knew it even then. I could stand up, say something cutting, throw the deed on the table and storm out. That would feel good for about a minute. Or I could do the thing my whole life had trained me for, the thing my father had never expected from his quiet, useful daughter. I could fix the system in front of everyone. Calmly, completely, leaving nothing for them to argue with later. My father dealt in private rooms and public shame. He'd ruined me privately for years, the favoritism, the phone calls, the silence. And now he was trying to finish the job publicly, in front of 50 witnesses, where the shame would stick. So, I wasn't going to fight him with his weapon. I wasn't going to shout or cry, or make it a screaming match he could later describe to the cousins as proof I was unstable. I was going to use my weapon, the one he never respected because it never raised its voice. The truth, documented, said out loud, in the same public room he'd chosen, in front of the same witnesses he'd gathered to bury me. He wanted an audience. Fine. He'd assembled the perfect one. I reached into my bag and rested my hand on the envelope. My heart was going hard, but my hands were steady. The way they get when a furnace is throwing sparks, and somebody has to be the calm one. I thought of the note. I'll never forget what you did. I thought, all right, Dad, let's remind everyone. Before I could rise, my Aunt Ruth spoke. She was my mother's older sister, 71, the one person at that table who had ever slipped me a folded 20 as a kid and told me I was the smart one. She'd been watching the whole thing with her mouth pressed thin. And now, into the awful quiet after Trevor's little speech, she said, "Paige, honey." Everyone turned. "Aren't you going to say anything?" There was something in how she asked it. Not pity. Permission. Like she'd seen more than the others, and was holding a door open for me. The room waited. I felt 50 pairs of eyes swing back to me. The same eyes that had looked away while my father called me worthless. My mother's jaw tightened. My father set down his glass. Finally, and I saw the first flicker of uncertainty cross his face, because this wasn't the script. In the script, I cried and left. I was supposed to be gone by the cake. Instead, I was reaching for my bag and standing up, and the legs of my chair scraped loud against the floor in the silence. "Yes, Aunt Ruth," I said. My voice came out level and clear, carrying down the table the way my father's used to. "I think I'd like to say a few words, since everyone's here." I looked at the little podium, at the microphone the restaurant kept for toasts and anniversaries. Then I looked at my father. "May I?" I asked him, polite as Sunday. He didn't know how to say no in front of the family he'd gathered, so he gave a stiff nod. And that, it turned out, was his mistake. I walked to the front of the room, past my mother, who wouldn't look up, past Trevor, who was smirking like he'd already won, and I picked up the microphone. My father was still standing near the podium. And for a moment, we were side by side, the boss and his quiet daughter, in front of the whole family. He handed me the mic like he'd already won, like he was magnanimously letting the condemned woman say her last words before the vote. I tapped it. It thumped. Live. He handed me the mic to watch me break. "Before you hear what I said, tell me in the comments. Have you ever stayed silent to protect someone who would never do the same for you?" Because that was the exact moment I stopped. I felt 30 years of silence sitting in my chest. All those phone calls answered, all those checks written, all that pride I protected at the cost of my own. And I felt it turn into something usable. My father took a half step back, expecting me to face the room and plead. I didn't plead. I looked out at the 50 faces of my family, the aunts and cousins and Uncle Dale. All of them braced for a breakdown. And I smiled. The small, calm smile I use when a customer tells me the unit is beyond repair and I already know I can save it. "Thank you all for coming," I said into the mic, because it turns out tonight really is a special occasion. You just don't know what kind yet. And the room went so quiet I could hear the balloons drifting against the ceiling. I started gently. I didn't want to fight. I wanted a record. 30 years ago today, my parents had a baby they didn't entirely plan for, I said. And I've spent most of those 30 years trying to be worth the trouble. A few of the cousins laughed, nervous, unsure if this was allowed. My father stood very still. "My dad just told you I turned my back on this family." I went on. "That I think I'm better than you. That I've never put family first." I let that hang a second. I'd like to talk about that. Not to argue with him, just to set the record straight since you all came such a long way for it. I kept my voice easy, conversational. The way you talk a scared family through a gas leak. No drama. Drama was what they were braced for, and giving people what they're braced for is how you lose the room. I'm not going to raise my voice, I said. I run a business. I've learned that the person yelling is usually the person who's already lost the argument and knows it. I didn't look at my father when I said it, which made it land harder. Somebody coughed. Aunt Ruth had her hands folded on the table now, watching me with something that was starting to look like hope. I set my bag on the podium. I didn't open it yet. First, I wanted to ask the room a question. An innocent one, the kind that opens a door you can't close again. Quick question, I said, looking around at all of them. How many of you know what actually happened to the house on Linden Street 5 years ago? The question changed the temperature of the room. People glanced at each other. The house on Linden Street was a known quantity in this family. The Mercer homestead, the place we'd had Thanksgivings, the porch and every old photo. As far as any of them knew, my parents had simply weathered a rough patch and kept it. What about the house? My Uncle Dale asked, frowning. He'd always liked that house. He had helped my father shingle the roof one summer. You all remember Dad's company had some trouble, I said. He told everyone they were thinking about downsizing. I watched my father's face. The color was going out of it. That wasn't quite the whole story, I said. The bank foreclosed. The house was scheduled for a sheriff sale. It was going to be auctioned off on the courthouse steps to whoever showed up with the most money. A murmur ran down the table. My mother's head came up sharply. This was not in the script. The script was about me, the cold, ungrateful daughter, not about the house, not about the year they'd buried in a polite lie. Paige, my father said, low, a warning. I'd heard that warning my whole life. It used to stop me cold. It didn't anymore. I'm almost done, Dad, I said gently into the mic so the whole room heard the gentleness. I just think everyone should know who showed up on those courthouse steps. I reached into the bag. 50 people leaned in at once. And I took out the envelope. I opened it and took out the first page. I didn't wave it around. I just unfolded it, set it flat on the podium, and smoothed it with my hand, the way you'd settle a contract before a signature. This is the deed to 14 Linden Street, I said. The house my parents live in. The house we're all here from, more or less. I paused. There's one name on it. I looked up and I found my father's eyes. And I said it without any heat at all. Mine. The room made a sound I'd never heard a room make. A kind of collective intake. 50 people breathing in at the same time. 5 years ago, when the bank took the house, I went to the auction myself, I said. I put my trucks up as collateral. I drained my savings. I stood on the courthouse steps, and I outbid a man who flips houses for a living, and I bought my parents' home so a stranger wouldn't. I've paid the mortgage on it every month since. Today I own it free and clear. I let that settle into the silence. My parents didn't get a hardship program from the bank, I said quietly. There was no program. There was me. The management company, they've been paying a little something to every month. The one that let them keep the porch and the photos and their dignity in front of all of you. That was me. I made it up so my father wouldn't have to stand in a room like this one and admit he'd lost the house. I looked at him. He had gone the gray of old concrete. So when you say I never put this family first, Dad, I said, I just gently point out that you're standing in a building eating a cake, planning my exile in a family whose home I'm the reason still exists. Nobody moved. The only sound in the whole banquet room was a single balloon squeaking softly as it rubbed against the ceiling. I wasn't finished, but I want to be clear about something. I wasn't enjoying it. I'd imagined this moment in flashes over the years, the satisfaction of them finally knowing. And now that it was here, it just felt like setting down something I'd carried too far. Mom said I've never put family first, I said. So, while we're getting the record straight, I kept my tone even, factual, no venom in it. When Mom needed her gallbladder surgery 3 years ago and the insurance fell through, somebody covered the bill. That was me. When Trevor's vending business went under and he owed money to people who don't send polite letters, somebody paid them off. That was me. Twice. When his crypto thing collapsed, that was me again. The third time, the time I finally said no more. I turned to look at my brother. Trevor was not smirking now. "The $20,000 you asked me for 4 months ago, Trev," I said. "The no that started all this. That wasn't me turning my back on the family. That was me, after years of saying yes, finally saying I was tired. And apparently, the punishment for one no after 100 yes is a banquet room." My mother was crying now, but it was a different crying than the performance. Messier. The kind that comes when a story you've told yourself collapses. Aunt Ruth had a hand pressed to her mouth. Uncle Dale was staring at my father like he'd never seen him before. And my father, the boss, the man with the public voice, opened his mouth and found that for once in his life, he had nothing in it. My father did what cornered men do. He went on the attack. "You're making this up," he said. But his voice didn't have the boss in it anymore. It came out thin. "You're twisting things. You always twist things. A few years ago, that would have worked. The family knew their roles, and mine was to back down. But I'd stopped reaching for the envelope and started reaching for the second page. I understand why this is hard to hear in front of everyone," I said. "So, I'm not going to ask you to take my word for it." I set the auction receipt on the podium beside the deed, the official one stamped by the county, dated 5 years ago that March. "This is the sheriff's sale record. It's a public document. Anyone can pull it at the courthouse Monday morning." I slid both papers down the table toward my Uncle Dale, because he was the one who'd shingle that roof, the one whose opinion the family actually weighed. "Dale," I said, "you read it. Tell them if I'm twisting anything." My uncle picked up the deed. He put on his glasses. He read it slowly, the way he read everything. And I watched his face change, watched the date register, watched my name register, watched the whole quiet 5 years of it land on a man who'd had no idea. He set the paper down very gently, like it might break. He looked at my father. "Ray," he said, and his voice was terrible in its disappointment. "Ray, what did you do?" And just like that, the room turned. Not toward me, away from him. Trevor saw the room turning and did what Trevor always did. He changed sides without admitting he'd ever been on one. Okay, he said, standing up, hands out. Suddenly the peacemaker. "Sis, look, this is all a misunderstanding. We're family. Let's everybody sit down and talk about this like adults." "Nobody move, Trevor," I said, not unkindly. He sat down. It might have been the first time in his life he did something the moment I asked. "You know what's funny?" I said, and I looked at my mother now, who was wiping her face with a cloth napkin. "Mom, on the phone last week, you told me real family doesn't keep score." A small, sad smile found its way onto my face. "You were right. It doesn't. I've been keeping score for this family for 5 years in silence, in a ledger nobody knew existed. Paying, and never once mentioning the total. That's no way to live. So, you'll be glad to hear I'm done keeping score." I sat down the mic for just a second, picked it back up. "I'm going to stop keeping the books," I said. "All of them." The line landed in the room like a stone in a still pond. People understood slowly what it meant. The payments, the covering, the quiet machine that had kept this family's life intact was, as of tonight, switching off. My mother's face crumpled because she was the only one besides me who'd ever have suspected how much that machine was carrying, and I realized she'd known somewhere. She'd always known. She'd just decided Trevor was worth my silence. I didn't want to leave them on the street. That's not who I am. And revenge that turns you into the thing you hated isn't revenge. It's just a transfer. So I laid out exactly what would happen, plainly, so there could be no confusion later. No version where I was the villain who threw her parents out. "Here's where things stand," I said to my parents, but loud enough for the witnesses, because witnesses were the whole point. "I own the house. I'm not putting you out of it. But the arrangement changes. Starting in 60 days, you'll either sign a fair lease and pay a fair rent like tenants, which you can afford on Dad's pension, or you'll make other plans. Your choice. I'll have it drawn up properly." I turned to Trevor. "And the bank is closed. No more covering, no more bailouts. If you want to get in early on something, get in with your own money." I said it without anger, which I think unsettled them more than shouting would have. "I'm not doing any of this to punish you," I said, and I mostly meant it. "I'm doing it because I finally understand that as long as I kept paying in secret, you got to keep believing I owed you. I don't owe you. I never did. I gave because I loved you, and you mistook it for weakness." I looked at my father one last time. That was the real mistake tonight, I said. Not mine. The whole room was looking at my father now, waiting to see what the man who'd called this meeting would do with the wreckage of it. This was supposed to be his night. He'd booked the room. He'd written the toast. He'd gathered every relative who mattered, so that his version of me, the cold, ungrateful, money-proud daughter, would become the official one. And instead, he was standing in front of all of them as the man who'd tried to publicly disown the daughter who'd secretly saved his home. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Because here is the thing about a public shaming. It only works if the room agrees with you. My father had spent his whole life trading on being the respected one, the boss, the patriarch whose words set the family's weather. And I watched that authority drain out of him in real time, face by face, as his brother and his sisters-in-law and his nieces looked at him and understood what he'd done. Aunt Ruth stood up from her chair. For 1 second, I thought she was going to say something to the room. Instead, she walked the length of that long table past all of them, and she came and stood beside me at the podium, and she took my hand. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. A 71-year-old woman crossing a silent room is its own kind of verdict. Then a cousin stood, then another. Not a stampede, nothing dramatic, just a slow, quiet shift. People getting up and drifting toward my end of the room, away from my father, the way water finds its level. My father stood alone at the head of his banquet, his glass still on the table, his toast curdling in the air, and he finally understood that he had gathered 50 witnesses, and every one of them had just watched him lose. I had one thing left to say, and then I was done. I reached into the envelope and took out the 3rd page, the soft-folded one, and I held it up so my father could see it across the room. You probably don't remember this, I said. I've kept it 5 years. I unfolded it carefully, the creases worn nearly through. After I saved the house, you left this on the seat of my truck. It's the only note you ever wrote me. I read it into the microphone in the steadiest voice I owned. So all 50 of them heard my father's own words in my mouth. It says, "I'll never forget what you did, kiddo." I looked up at him. The room was so still it hurt. "I guess tonight," I said quietly, "you finally did." And that was when my father broke. Not into tears. Into rage. The only feeling he'd ever let himself show. "That's enough," he roared. And his fist came down on the table, and a wine glass tipped and shattered, and nobody flinched because nobody was looking at the glass. "This is my family. I say who's in it. I decide." He was shouting now, red spittle flying, yanking at the tablecloth as he tried to find his footing. And the more he shouted, the smaller he got, because the whole room was watching the calm woman at the microphone and the screaming man at the head of the table. And they understood exactly which one of us had lost control and which one of us never would. "You don't decide anything anymore, Dad," I said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. That's what tonight was really about. You felt it slipping, so you tried to take it back the only way you knew how, in public, with an audience. But you can't disown the person who owns the house. You can only show everyone who you are. I set the microphone down on the podium. The thump of it echoed. "Happy birthday to me," I said to no one in particular. And I picked up my bag and I left my father standing alone in a room full of people who used to be his. I made it to the parking lot before my hands started shaking, which is about as long as I expected them to hold. The March air was cold and good. I stood by my truck, the one with my name on the side in blue, the same truck I'd put up as collateral to save a house for people who just tried to erase me, and I breathed. Behind me, I heard the restaurant door, and I turned, half-braced for my father. It was my Uncle Dale. He came across the lot slowly, hands in his jacket pockets, looking older than he had an hour ago. He stopped a few feet from me, and for a moment he couldn't find the words. "I didn't know," he finally said. "Paige, I swear to you. None of us knew. He told us you'd gotten cold, that you'd refused to help your own mother." He shook his head. "Nobody told us what you'd actually done. If we'd known." He stopped because we both knew the end of that sentence didn't really exist. They hadn't known because my father had built the not knowing on purpose, and because none of them had ever once asked the quiet daughter how the house got saved. Dale wasn't a villain. He was just a man who'd never thought to wonder. That's its own kind of failure, but it isn't the same as cruelty. And I was too tired to punish him for it. "It's okay, Uncle Dale," I said. "It wasn't fully, but you can mean a thing part way." He nodded, miserable. Then he said, Your grandfather would have been proud of you the way you handled that. He never could stand a man who needed an audience to feel big. He squeezed my shoulder the way he had when I walked in. Except this time, it meant something. Then he went back inside to whatever was left of that dinner, and I got in my truck. I sat there a minute. Then I drove home to my own place, the one nobody in that family had ever helped me pay for. And I slept better than I had in 5 years. People always want to know if we reconciled. We didn't. Not really. And I've made my peace with that. I had the lease drawn up, fair and clean. And my parents signed it because the alternative was explaining to the whole extended family why they wouldn't. They live in the house on Linden Street, still. Tenants now, paying a reasonable rent they can manage on my father's pension, and we are unfailingly polite on the rare occasions we speak. My father has never apologized. I've stopped waiting for it. Some men would rather be right alone than wrong in company, and you can't save a person from that. You can only stop letting it cost you. Trevor called me about a month later when the reality of the closed bank set in and asked, with no apparent irony, if I could help him with just one thing. I told him I loved him and hung up. He's had to get a job. I hear it's going about as well as you'd expect, but he's learning slowly what the rest of us learned young. That money you don't earn never really feels like yours. My mother sent me a birthday card this year, a real one, with a few lines in it that came closer to sorry than she's ever managed out loud. I haven't decided what to do with that yet. Some doors you leave cracked just in case, without walking through them. The one person I made sure not to punish was my little cousin Emma, Trevor's daughter, who's 8 and didn't choose any of these people. I set up a small education fund for her. The quiet kind. The kind she'll find out about when she's grown, and maybe needs to know that one person in this family gave without keeping score. As for me, I went back to work Monday morning. There was a furnace down across town and a family without heat, and that, it turns out, is the thing I was actually put here to do. Fix what's broken. Show up when called. I just finally learned the difference between the people who call because they need you and the people who call because they own you. The one who carries the whole family is allowed to set it down. And the day you finally do, you find out something they never wanted you to know. It was never your weight to begin with, and the people calling it love were just afraid you'd notice. If you've ever been the quiet one who paid for everything and got handed a knife at the dinner, you're allowed to set the mic down and walk out with your head high. The toast that was meant to erase me, the deed I laid on the table, the note that said he'd never forget, hold your line and stop keeping books nobody thanks you for. If this story reached you, share it with someone who carries too much. What would you have done in my place? Tell me in the comments. I really want to know.